I can still hear the words, sharp and merciless, echoing in my ears as if they were etched into the walls of that kitchen. I had only asked, my voice trembling in the stillness of a late September evening, "Why did you change your phone password?" He didn't hesitate. He didn't look away. His fork paused above the plate, his eyes narrowing, and with a tone stripped of all tenderness, he replied, "Because it's not your business anymore." The sentence struck me like a blow to the chest. My hands trembled so hard that I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. I could feel the pulse in my neck, frantic and uneven, as if my own body was protesting what my heart already knew, but refused to accept. The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't just silence. It was the kind that weighs on you, pressing against your ribs until you can barely breathe. Even the ticking of the old clock on the wall seemed louder, crueler. We weren't alone. His sister Claire had been invited for dinner. She sat across from us, frozen, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her eyes darted between us, wide with disbelief, as though she had just witnessed something indecent, something that should never have been said out loud. And that's what hurt the most. The humiliation wasn't private, it was public. My pain had been exposed like a spectacle at the dinner table. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. For a second, I thought maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe he had said it in jest. Maybe his tone was harsher than he intended. But then I caught it, the faintest shadow of a smirk tugging at his lips. It wasn't amusement. It was satisfaction. He wanted me to feel small. In that moment, the man I had shared 23 years of my life with, the man whose children I had carried, whose meals I had cooked, whose ambitions I had supported, looked at me as if I were nothing more than an intruder in his life. My chest tightened. My mind began to race through fragments of our history together. Our first apartment in Denver with the peeling wallpaper, the nights we stayed awake with our newborn son, the long drives through snowy roads just to spend Thanksgiving with his parents. All of it now felt like a cruel joke, a story I had written alone while he had been playing another role entirely. The sound of Claire clearing her throat jolted me back to the present. She set her fork down with deliberate care, as if afraid that any sudden movement would shatter what little composure remained in the room. Her gaze softened when it met mine, but she said nothing. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she knew words would be useless against the sharpness of his cruelty. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. But all I could do was sit there, gripping the edge of the table, pretending my world hadn't just collapsed in front of an audience. My husband went back to eating, as if nothing had happened, as if those words hadn't just cut through the very fabric of our marriage. The clinking of his fork against the plate was louder than any insult he had ever thrown at me. And in that unbearable normalcy, I realized something. This was only the beginning. That night, long after the plates had been cleared and Claire had excused herself with an awkward hug at the door, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He slept beside me, his breathing steady, heavy, unbothered. I could almost envy him, the way he could unleash cruelty and then drift into peace as though nothing had happened. I, on the other hand, could not silence my mind. His words circled endlessly. Because it's not your business anymore. It wasn't just about a phone password. It was about everything it stood for. It was about the years, the sacrifices, the invisible ledger of things I had given up to make room for his life, his career, his comfort. I thought of the job I once had, teaching art at a small community college in Chicago. Those classes had given me a purpose, a voice. My students would leave the room with paint on their hands and hope in their eyes, and I felt alive in those moments. But he had convinced me to give it up, saying, "The kids need you more than strangers do. I thought of the holidays. 20 Christmases where I chose his family over mine, hosting in our home, cooking dishes I didn't even like, smiling through exhaustion while my own friends celebrated without me. I had missed weddings, reunions, laughter that might have kept me whole. I thought of the health I had surrendered, migraines that pulsed behind my eyes from too many sleepless nights, back pain from carrying boxes, groceries, children, burdens that were always mine alone. He had always promised, "Once things settle down, you'll have time for yourself." Things never settled. My time never came. And I thought of the dreams I had folded away like fragile dresses at the back of a closet, painting in Florence, writing a book of my own, traveling through mountains and rivers that existed only on postcards stuck to our refrigerator. Each dream postponed until tomorrow, until next year, until never. The ceiling above me blurred as tears filled my eyes. For what? For whom had I silenced my own voice? For a man who could look me in the eye and declare that my presence in his private world no longer mattered. I turned to the nightstand, desperate for something to anchor me. My hand found the small wooden jewelry box, dark and worn smooth from years of touch. Inside it rested my mother's silver bracelet, engraved with delicate forget-me-not flowers. I lifted it carefully, feeling its cool weight against my palm. My mother had worn it every day of her life until her last breath. She had pressed it into my hand during her final week, whispering, "When the world tries to erase you, hold on to something that remembers who you are." For years I had worn it on anniversaries, on birthdays, believing it symbolized commitment, his and mine. But now, staring at the dim light glinting off its surface, it seemed to tell me another story, a story of how much of myself I had allowed to vanish while I clung to an illusion of belonging. My chest tightened. The bracelet felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried not just my mother's memory, but the weight of every sacrifice I had made in silence. I slipped it onto my wrist, more instinct than decision. It was a gesture of desperation, of needing to feel at least one bond that hadn't betrayed me. The metal pressed against my skin, cold but grounding, like a reminder that I still existed, even if he no longer saw me. And yet, as I turned toward the man sleeping beside me, I couldn't help but wonder. If I had given up so much, and he still chose to shut me out, what was left of me to save? The following morning I gathered what little courage had survived the night. The bracelet still circled my wrist, its weight reminding me that I could not allow his words to pass, as though they had never been spoken. He sat at the kitchen table sipping his coffee, scrolling through his phone, utterly absorbed. Sunlight poured in through the blinds, streaking across the floor, and I caught myself staring at the way the light touched his hands. The same hands that had once held mine with gentleness, now strangers to me. I pulled out a chair across from him, the scrape of wood against tile louder than I intended. He glanced up briefly, his brow lifting, then returned his gaze to the screen. "Daniel," I began, my voice unsteady but determined. "We need to talk about what you said last night." He set his coffee down slowly, as if giving me the illusion of attention. His eyes finally met mine, cool, unreadable. "What exactly do you want to talk about?" "You said that it's not my business anymore." My fingers clenched against the table's edge. "We've been married for 23 years. Of course it's my business. Everything in your life has always been mine, and mine yours." A shadow crossed his face. Irritation, not remorse. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. "You're being dramatic." The words stung more than I expected. Dramatic, emotional, overreacting. He had used them before, little daggers disguised as casual remarks, ways to dismiss me without confronting the truth. "I'm not being dramatic," I said, though my voice cracked. "I'm asking why you feel the need to hide from me." He set his phone down with a deliberate thud, his jaw tightening. "Because not everything revolves around you, Sarah. You smother. You question everything. I need space. I need privacy. Can't a man have that in his own home?" "Privacy?" I repeated, the word foreign on my tongue. "Daniel, privacy is when you close the door to take a shower, not when you lock me out of your life." His lips curled into a sneer. "There it is again. You can't let anything go. You're too emotional, too suspicious. No wonder the kids don't tell you things. You twist everything into some kind of betrayal." The sentence landed harder than a slap. The kids. He had pulled them into this, weaponizing the very people I had given my life to raise. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself not to look away. "So that's what you think of me? That I twist things? That I'm unstable?" His eyes flickered just for a second, with something that looked like triumph. "I didn't say unstable. You said it." The manipulation was deliberate, precise, cruel. He wanted me to doubt myself, to feel small, hysterical, powerless. I pressed the bracelet tighter against my wrist beneath the table, grounding myself in its cool metal. My mother's voice seemed to whisper through the silence. "Don't let him erase you." I drew a shaky breath. "I just want honesty, Daniel. That's all I've ever asked, after everything I've sacrificed for this family. Don't I at least deserve that?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice, the edge of threat curling around each word. "If you keep pushing, you'll regret it. Sometimes it's better not to know the answers you're digging for." The warning chilled me. My body froze, my mind screaming questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. What was he hiding? Who was he hiding? Before I could find the strength to ask, his phone buzzed. He grabbed it instantly, shielding the screen from me as though it were treasure. Then, without another glance in my direction, he stood up and walked out of the kitchen, leaving his half-drunk coffee steaming on the table between us. And I sat there, clutching the bracelet, knowing I had just been dismissed, not only as a wife, but as a person who deserved truth. For most of my marriage I had been quiet, accommodating. The one who smoothed over arguments, who swallowed insults, who turned her pain into silence for the sake of peace. But something inside me shifted after that morning, something I hadn't felt in years. It happened almost without thought. Later that afternoon, when Daniel left his phone charging on the counter before stepping into the shower, I found myself standing in front of it. The black screen stared back at me, daring me. My hands trembled, my chest tightened, but I did not pick it up. Instead, I did something unexpected, even to myself. I walked into our bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept our important papers, and pulled out the small envelope that held our joint bank statements. With deliberate hands, I slid the most recent statement into my purse. It wasn't about the phone. It was about taking back something, anything, that belonged to me too. For years I had let him manage all of it, believing that trust meant surrender. But now, trust had been weaponized against me. If he wanted privacy, then I would have knowledge. My heart pounded as I tucked the envelope deep into my bag, the bracelet cool against my skin, as though approving of my act. I didn't recognize my own firmness, the thought whispered. It startled me, this new pulse of resistance. When Daniel came out of the shower, I was already in the living room, pretending to fold laundry. He glanced at me, suspicious perhaps, but said nothing. His silence was thick with the arrogance of a man who believed I would never step outside the cage he had built around me. But the cage had cracked. That evening I took another step. After dinner, while the kids were in the living room watching television, I walked into Daniel's study. The room smelled of leather and old coffee. Stacks of papers lay across his desk. Among them was a folder with property deeds, insurance documents, contracts, all things he had always said were too complicated for me to bother with. I didn't take anything, not yet. But I opened the top drawer and found a small key, the key to his locked cabinet. I held it in my palm for a moment, the cool metal biting into my skin. Then I placed it back, carefully, closing the drawer as though sealing a pact with myself. When I stepped into the hallway, our daughter Emily was standing there. She was 19, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "What were you doing in Dad's office?" she asked, her tone sharp, defensive. I froze, guilt flashing across my face before I could hide it. "Nothing," I said too quickly. "Just looking for a pen." Her lips curled, the same way Daniel's did when he was mocking me. "You're always suspicious, Mom. Dad's right. You make problems where there aren't any." The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. To hear my daughter echo his cruelty was like losing her twice, once as a child who used to cling to me, and now as a young woman standing in judgment. "I was just looking for a pen," I repeated softly, but she was already walking away, shaking her head. Later that night I heard voices downstairs, Daniel's and Emily's. Their tones hushed but intense. My name floated through the conversation, followed by Emily's sharp whisper. "She's paranoid. You need to do something." My chest constricted. My small act of autonomy had not only been noticed, it had already been turned against me. And I knew, with a clarity that chilled me, that whatever came next would not be gentle. By Saturday morning, the house felt colder, as if the walls themselves had pulled back. I tried to fill the silence with ordinary tasks, watering the plants in the kitchen window, wiping the counter even though it was already clean, smoothing the throw on the couch so its fringes aligned just right. Normalcy as a spell against dread. It didn't hold. Emily came downstairs in a hurry, ponytail high, determination hardening her features into a face I recognized but no longer understood. Minutes later, Jacob arrived too. Our son, 22, taller than his father with the same square jaw but softer eyes. He avoided my gaze as he stepped into the living room, hands jammed into the pockets of his hoodie. Daniel followed, lingering near the doorway like a judge who already knew the verdict. Emily set a folder on the coffee table with a theatrical slap. "We need to talk," she said, looking at me but speaking for an audience. "Dad's been patient, but this is getting out of hand." My heartbeat stumbled. The bracelet on my wrist pressed a cold ring around my pulse. "Out of hand?" I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "What exactly is out of hand?" "You going through Dad's things?" Emily shot back. "Sneaking around, creating drama. It's not healthy." Jacob shifted. Maybe—" She cut him off. "No, someone has to say it." Turning to me again, she added, "You need help, Mom." The words landed bluntly, like objects being thrown, one after another. Professional help. There it was. The script I knew too well. Label me, corner me, make any protest sound like proof of instability. "I looked for a pen," I said quietly. "That's all." Emily's laugh was thin, brittle. She flipped open the folder. Inside were printed emails, bank notifications, and what looked like a draft of some legal document. The edges of the paper glinted under the morning light like blades. "We spoke to Uncle Mark," she said. Daniel's brother, a real estate agent who had always favored his side in every family disagreement. He says we need to protect Dad and the house. There are options. Protect him from what? I asked, but my throat had gone dry. From you making erratic decisions, she said. From you sabotaging things. We can't keep living like this. Jacob finally looked at me, eyes pleading. Mom, no one is calling you erratic. We're just worried. That was somehow worse, a softness that disguised the same pressure. Emily slid a page toward me. It's a simple thing, she said. A precaution, a co-ownership amendment. It puts the house in all our names. That way, if something happens, the assets are protected. Dad says it's responsible. My stomach lurched. The house, the rooms I had painted, the floors I had scrubbed on my hands and knees, the photographs I had arranged along the stairs, first day of school smiles, Halloween costumes with uneven hems I'd sewn at midnight. They wanted to carve it up, stamp their names over memories I had kept alive when no one else did. Daniel finally spoke, voice smooth. It's just paperwork, Sarah. Practical. You've always been sentimental. This is about stability. Stability? I whispered. You changed your phone password and told me it's none of my business. And now you want to make the house my business, in your names. He didn't flinch. You're twisting this, he said flatly. Again. My chest burned. The bracelet felt suddenly hot against my wrist, as if my mother's memory were pulsing there, warning me. I will not sign, I said, barely above a whisper, but with more certainty than I expected. This home is where I raised you. It's mine too. Emily's face hardened further. It's not just about the house. It's about your behavior. We talked to Pastor Jim. He thinks a temporary guardianship for medical and financial decisions might be wise until you stabilize. The room spun. Guardianship, I managed, tasting metal. I'm not sick. No one said sick, Daniel replied with mock patience. Overwhelmed. It happens. The kids are looking out for you, for all of us. You should be grateful. Grateful. The word detonated inside me. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. Mom, please. Em's just scared. We all are. Things have been tense. If you'd see a counselor, maybe sign some temporary papers. Temporary? I repeated. Like temporary privacy on your father's phone? Daniel's mouth twitched. Emily leaned forward, her voice low, urgent. You're making this harder than it needs to be. She tapped the folder. If you refuse, we'll have to pursue legal steps. And if it gets to that point, Mom, a judge will look at everything. The arguments, the way you've been acting, the fact that you went into Dad's office. So now I'm a danger to paperwork, I said, the bitterness surprising even me. Emily's eyes flashed. Don't be sarcastic. It's manipulative. Manipulative, emotional, dramatic. The beads of a rosary I had been forced to count by heart. I thought of the years I had spent being the steady one, the bridge between Daniel and the kids, the keeper of birthdays and bedtime rituals, the memorizer of every shoe size, allergy, and fear. I thought of Emily at 6 clinging to my leg, Jacob at 8 waking from nightmares into my arms. I had been their North Star through storms they never even saw. Now they were dragging clouds into my living room and calling it prudence. The bracelet pressed into my skin. When the world tries to erase you, hold on to something that remembers who you are. I straightened my shoulders. I'm not signing, I said. Not today. Not like this. Emily pushed the folder closer, her voice suddenly sharp with something I had never heard from her before. something that sounded like triumph. "We also spoke to the bank, Mom, about the savings." She glanced at Daniel, then back at me. "If you don't cooperate, they can freeze certain accounts until there's clarity. Uncle Mark said it's standard when there are concerns about decision-making." The threat slid across the table and perched between us like a vulture. "Freeze the accounts! Cut the oxygen!" Jacob flinched. "Em, seriously?" "No," she said. "We have to be firm." Then to me, "It's for your own good." A laugh rose in my throat, hollow and frightening. "My own good," I repeated. "Is that what this is?" Daniel exhaled as though burdened by my resistance. "Sarah, you can sign now, calmly, with everyone here. Or we can do it the harder way. You don't want the harder way." "What's the harder way?" I asked, though I already knew. Emily didn't blink. "We file. We present evidence. We talk about your moods. The way you've been forgetting things." "I forget things because I do everything," I said, my voice breaking. "Because I carry everything." "See?" Emily said quietly to Daniel. "She's escalating." My hands trembled, but not with fear, with clarity. I slid the folder back across the table, never breaking eye contact. "If you try to take this house from me," I said, "you'll have to lie about who I am to do it." A silence, the kind that hums. Jacob looked at me, eyes glassy. "Mom," he whispered, "please." I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to pull both of my children into my arms and remind them of the nights I sat at the edge of their beds, whispering stories until their breathing softened. But there was a man in the doorway who had taught them a different language, one where love meant control and concern meant erasure. Emily closed the folder with a soft, decisive thud. "We'll come back tomorrow," she said. "Talk to Pastor Jim again. Maybe bring someone from the bank. You'll see it's reasonable." They moved toward the door, Daniel lingering last, his gaze sweeping the room as if taking inventory of what would soon belong to him by proxy. He paused at the hall table where the family photograph stood, the curated gallery of our lives. With 2 fingers, he nudged one frame so my face leaned slightly out of alignment. Something inside me went very still. When the door closed and the house settled into its old creaks, I stood alone in the center of the living room, the bracelet cool and steady at my wrist. The light had shifted. The day was tilting. I went to the stairs and ran my hand along the banister we had chosen together, stain number 3 from a hardware store on Lakeview, because number 1 was too pale and number 2 too orange. I remembered the laughter, the bickering, the way we had finally agreed, a small compromise that once felt like love. I looked back at the hall table, at the slightly crooked frame, at the narrow space that had opened beneath my feet. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the only person who, in this moment, might see me clearly. "Hello," a steady voice answered. "Grace," I said, my throat tight. "I think my family is trying to take my house." There was a pause, heavy but warm. "Document everything," she said, "and start with today." I turned toward the kitchen, toward a drawer where I knew a stack of blank notebooks lay waiting. My fingers ached with the sudden need to write, but as I reached for the drawer, I heard the crunch of tires in our driveway. They were back. Not alone. The crunch of tires froze me mid-step. Through the curtain, I caught the flash of a familiar sedan. Pastor Jim's car. My breath caught. They hadn't wasted time. Less than an hour after threatening me, they had returned with an authority figure in tow. Someone whose voice carried weight not only in our family, but across the whole community. The front door opened before I could gather myself. Emily entered first, chin lifted, confidence radiating from her posture. Jacob trailed behind, quieter, avoiding my eyes again. And then Pastor Jim stepped in, his presence filling the living room with the solemnity of a courtroom. Daniel followed last, closing the door as if sealing my fate. "Sarah," Pastor Jim greeted, his voice calm, deliberate. "Your family asked me to stop by. They're concerned." Concerned. The word grated, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. Concerned about what? Daniel stepped forward, his hand resting on Emily's shoulder like a general guiding his soldier. "About your state of mind, about stability. We just want to protect what we've built." Pastor Jim studied me with those steady gray eyes that had baptized both our children, had stood at our table during Thanksgiving prayers, had blessed our home the day we moved in. I had once believed those eyes could see through pretense, but now I wondered whose truth he was prepared to hear. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not sick. I don't need anyone to speak for me." Emily crossed her arms. "See? Defensive. This is exactly what I told you." Pastor Jim raised a hand, silencing her. His gaze returned to me. "Sarah, sometimes when the people closest to us see changes, it's worth listening. No one is attacking you. They want to help." I pressed the bracelet tighter against my wrist, as if my mother's memory could anchor me. "Help looks different when it comes with threats to take your house," I said quietly. For a moment, the air shifted. Pastor Jim's brows knit together, and he turned to Daniel. "Is that true?" Daniel's smile was thin. "She's exaggerating. It's paperwork. Simple precaution. You know how she can be. Emotional, sensitive. We've been patient, but it's wearing on the family." The room tilted. I knew this rhythm. Him painting himself calm, reasonable, logical, while I became the trembling, emotional foil, a narrative crafted with precision. I forced my voice to cut through the fog. "Pastor, I gave up my career, my friends, my health for this family. I have spent 2 decades carrying their needs above my own. And when I asked my husband why he changed his phone password, do you know what he said to me?" Silence thickened. Everyone looked at me. I met Pastor Jim's gaze, refusing to blink. He said, "Because it's not your business anymore." The words dropped into the room like stones into deep water. Even Jacob shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering toward the floor. Pastor Jim cleared his throat, adjusting his collar. "That was not wise, Daniel." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Emily spoke instead, sharp and quick. "She's twisting things. Dad was just asking for privacy, like anyone deserves. She's making it into something it's not." But Pastor Jim didn't look convinced. His gaze returned to me, softer now. "Sarah," he said quietly, "do you have records, notes, anything you've written down? Sometimes the clearest way to cut through confusion is documentation." I blinked, his words ringing like a bell inside me. Documentation. That was exactly what Grace had said over the phone just minutes before. Document everything. It felt like a thread connecting me back to sanity, to strategy. My ally wasn't only Grace. In that moment, even Pastor Jim, perhaps unknowingly, gave me a lifeline. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I'll start today." Daniel's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing with sudden tension. "Start what?" "Writing," I said, steadying my breath. "Every word, every threat, every visit like this one." Emily scoffed. "Oh God, she's journaling now. See? This is paranoia." But for the first time in days, a flicker of strength lit inside me. They thought they were cornering me. But instead they had confirmed the very thing that could protect me. Proof. Pastor Jim adjusted his coat, sensing the storm beneath the calm surface. "I'll check back," he said finally, and his voice carried a weight none of them could dismiss. "In the meantime, I encourage all of you to remember, truth will outlast fear." When he left, Daniel's smile had vanished, replaced by a shadow that made the air heavier. Emily muttered something under her breath. Jacob remained still, his eyes betraying conflict. "And me?" I walked to the kitchen, pulled open the drawer, and set a blank notebook on the table. With trembling hands, I wrote the date at the top of the page. But as I pressed the pen down for the first word, I heard Daniel's voice from the doorway, low and dangerous. "Careful, Sarah. Words can be used against you, too." I slept in fragments, waking to the scratch of branches on the window and the aftertaste of fear. At dawn, I dressed in the quiet of our room and slipped the notebook into my tote. The bracelet pressed a cool circle on my wrist, like a vow I couldn't take back. Grace's voice rang in my head, braided with Pastor Jim's. "Document everything." My first stop was the bank on Belmont, the one where I had opened our first joint account, when Jacob was still in a stroller, and the teller had given him a lollipop just to stop his hiccups. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and winter coats. Behind the counter, a young teller, Kelsey, her name tag said, smiled as if we were both pretending this was normal. "I'd like to review recent activity on my accounts," I said. "Joint checking, savings, and the home equity line." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Of course," she said. Her fingers skated over the keyboard. Then her smile faltered. Barely, but I saw it. "One moment, Ms. Sarah Bennett." I watched her pupils dilate, the small flinch of someone reading something she wished she hadn't. She flagged a manager with a discreet gesture, and within seconds a woman in a tailored navy suit approached. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Miss Carter. Would you come with me?" The glass-walled office amplified my reflection. Tired eyes, hair pinned too tightly, the bracelet glinting like a small lighthouse. Miss Carter closed the door with careful hands. "There's a notation on your profile," she said, folding her fingers. "A family member came in yesterday inquiring about guardianship and requesting changes to account permissions." My mouth went dry. "A guardianship is a legal status. Do you have a court order?" "No," she said quickly. "We do not. We require one to enact anything. However," she tapped the screen, "we have a temporary caution flag. It means any unusual transactions will require verification from both account holders." "Both?" I repeated. "Even if it's within our normal pattern?" "Yes." Miss Carter tilted her head, sympathetic but professional. "It's meant to protect everyone involved." "From me?" The words fell out before I could catch them. Beyond the glass, the line to the tellers had lengthened. I saw a woman I recognized from church craning her neck, seeing me through the transparency of the office, seeing the manager, the pressed lips, the quiet conversation. Shame rose like heat in my chest. "Ms." Carter's face softened. "From confusion," she said. "I'm not taking sides." "They were here yesterday," I whispered. "Without me?" "Yes." She paused. "There was also an attempt this morning to add 2 additional names to the savings account, pending future documentation. We declined." A sound left me, half laugh, half gasp. "My children." Miss Carter slid a printed activity log across the desk. "I can give you this copy, and if you'd like, we can place a password on in-person inquiries, a word only you and your husband should know." I stared at her. Password? The irony scraped down my throat like gravel. Yes, I said finally. Do it. The word is... My eyes dropped to the bracelet, the engraved flowers catching the fluorescent light. Forget-me-not, she typed. It's set. Then more gently. Miss Bennet, if anyone pressures you, you can ask us to call the police. You're not alone here. I thanked her, though the gratitude felt like a thin coat against sleet. At the door, the woman from church, Marjorie, pretended not to see me as I passed. Then she remembered her manners and touched my arm lightly, her voice pitched to Carrie. Everything okay, dear? The question carried an audience. 2 men in suits glanced up. A teller leaned forward. The carpet swallowed my answer. Everything's fine, I said, performing a smile. Just paperwork. Outside, the wind bit at my cheeks. I sat in the car and wrote everything in the notebook. Names, times, exact phrases. The word guardianship underlined until the paper nearly tore. My hand shook so much the letters slanted uphill. When I got home, a squad car idled at the curb. Blue and red lights didn't spin. Still, the presence stamped the air. My neighbor, Mrs. Duffy, stood on her porch, pretending to shake a mat that didn't need shaking. The officers were at my door speaking to Daniel. His voice was smooth, composed. Ma'am? One of them said when I reached the steps, his thumbs hooked in the vest of his uniform. We got a call for a wellness check. From whom? He glanced at his notes. A family member. Concern about your well-being. Just routine. Routine. The word made my teeth ache. I'm fine. Daniel offered an almost smile. This is embarrassing, he told the officer. My wife has been under stress. We're just trying to make sure she gets appropriate support. The officer nodded as if the sentence were a prescription. He turned back to me. Any medications? Any thoughts of harming yourself? No. I felt heat crawl up my neck with the picture framed for the street. The concerned husband, the polite officers, the woman on the porch. I'm not a danger to myself or anyone. I'm being harassed. Harassed? Daniel's eyebrows climbed in mild surprise. Sarah. The other officer, shorter, her eyes quick, looked from my face to the bracelet and back again. Something softened in her expression, almost imperceptibly. Do you feel safe in the home? She asked, tone different now. I do not feel respected, I said. My accounts were targeted. My children are being used to pressure me. Is that in your report? The first officer shifted, uncomfortable with nuance. Ma'am, we're not here to take sides. Of course they weren't. No one ever is, not at first. That's how you get erased, by everyone stepping back to neutrality while your name gets rewritten. The shorter officer spoke again, careful. Do you have someone you can call if things escalate? Yes, I said, my friend Grace, and a pastor who told us all to document everything. Good, she said. Keep doing that. She handed me a card. If anyone makes you feel threatened, call. They left with a nod. Mrs. Duffy retreated, satisfied or disappointed, I couldn't tell. Daniel closed the door with a sigh, heavy enough to make the hinges complain. See what you've done? He said softly, as if he were saddened by my theatrics. The whole neighborhood. I didn't call them, I replied. You did? He tilted his head. I called because I'm worried. You make it very hard to be on your side. My laughter startled even me. You were never on my side. Before he could answer, Emily swept in from the kitchen, phone in hand, cheeks pink with excitement or righteousness. Pastor Jim thinks you should go for an evaluation, she announced. Just to clear things up, voluntary. It will look good if it comes to court. Court. The word lodged in my throat like a stone. For what? For guardianship. she said simply, and glanced at Daniel, who didn't contradict her. Mom, it's 15 minutes in triage. They just ask questions. If you're fine, you'll have proof. Jacob hovered near the stairs, torn. Mom, maybe it would calm everything down. I'll go with you. The room tilted again. Now the institution wasn't just the bank. It was the hospital, the intake forms, the boxes that wanted to hold my name. I saw myself sitting under fluorescent lights while strangers evaluated my reality, while someone scribbled anxious affect and family conflict and possible mood disorder. Because I'd been crying for 2 days after 23 years of being minimized. The trap was elegant. If I refused, I seemed unstable. If I agreed, they would comb my grief for proof of madness. Voluntary, Emily repeated as if the word were a gift. Be reasonable. The bracelet bit into my skin when I clenched my fist, the engraved flowers pressing their tiny shapes into my palm like a code I could finally read. My mother's voice threaded through the hum of the refrigerator, the officer's footsteps fading on the porch, the rustle of Emily's certainty. Fine, I said, surprising us all. I'll go. Daniel blinked. Now. Now. I grabbed my tote and the notebook. But I'm documenting every second, every question, every person who speaks to me. Emily smiled at Jacob as if victory had arrived, gift-wrapped. Daniel reached for his keys. The house seemed to hold its breath. Outside, as we stepped into the low gray light, an ambulance rolled slow at the end of the block, siren off, lights still. It turned toward us. Emily murmured, "Good, they're here." I stopped on the porch step, the bracelet cold and strong on my wrist, and watched the red wash of the lights crawl across the front of our house like a stain that wouldn't come out. The paramedic climbed down, clipboard ready. "Mrs. Bennett?" he called. "We've been asked to transport you, voluntarily, for assessment." I opened my mouth to answer, and saw who stepped out of the passenger seat behind him. It wasn't a stranger who stepped out of the ambulance that day. It was Grace. Her auburn hair was tied back in a loose bun, her nurse's badge clipped to her uniform, her eyes widening when she saw me standing on the porch. "Sarah," she breathed, as if the sight of me there, flanked by my husband, shadowed by my children, confirmed something she had feared. Daniel stiffened. "You know her?" Grace ignored him. She climbed the steps quickly, taking my hand before anyone could intervene. Her grip was warm, steady, alive. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm here." I squeezed her hand hard, as though I had been treading water for weeks, and she was the first rope thrown my way. My notebook was in my tote, heavy with the words I had started to gather. But her presence was another kind of proof. Someone who remembered me before all of this. Someone who knew who I had been. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to reclaim control. "Grace, this is a family matter." She turned her gaze on him, sharp as glass. "No, Daniel. It became more than a family matter the moment you called in a wellness check. She's my patient now, and I'll decide if she goes anywhere." For a moment, no one moved. Emily's face flushed red. Jacob looked at the ground, and Daniel's jaw tightened in silent fury. Grace leaned closer to me. "Do you want to go in the ambulance, Sarah?" The question should have been simple, but the weight of it pressed down like the entire world was waiting for my answer. If I said yes, they would write my story in their files, their checkboxes, their careful clinical terms. If I said no, I would look defiant, paranoid, resistant to care. The bracelet pressed cold against my wrist. When the world tries to erase you, hold on to something that remembers who you are. I lifted my chin. "No, I don't want to go." Grace nodded, turning to the paramedics. "She's competent, oriented, and expressing her wishes clearly. Document refusal and clear the call." The paramedic hesitated, glancing at Daniel, who bristled with barely contained rage. But Grace's voice carried authority, professional, and calm. Reluctantly, he scribbled notes on his clipboard, then signaled to his partner. The ambulance doors closed with a hollow clang, and the vehicle rolled away, its lights washing our street one last time before disappearing around the corner. The moment it was gone, Daniel's composure cracked. "This is exactly what I meant," he snapped at Grace. "She's unstable. She's paranoid. You should be on our side." Grace didn't flinch. "I don't choose sides, Daniel. I choose facts. And the fact is, she's lucid, she's rational, and she doesn't need to be carted off just because it's convenient for you." Emily gasped, indignant. "Convenient? Do you even know what it's like living with her moods?" I flinched, but Grace's hand remained steady on mine. "I've known Sarah longer than you've been alive," she said quietly. "She's not unstable. She's exhausted. There's a difference." Her words pierced me deeper than she could know. Exhausted? Yes, that was it. Not broken, not crazy. Exhausted from carrying a family on my back while being told I was too emotional to stand. After they left, after the door closed and Daniel retreated to his study in icy silence, I went upstairs. I needed to be alone. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the light buzzing faintly above me. My reflection startled me. Hollowed cheeks, eyes rimmed with red, shoulders slumped from years of carrying weight I had mistaken for love. I raised my wrist, the bracelet glinting under the harsh bulb. Slowly, I traced the tiny engraved flowers with my fingertip. My mother's voice seemed to echo in the tiles. "Don't let them erase you." For years, I had worn the bracelet as a token of connection. Her to me to Daniel, us to the family we had built. But now, staring into the mirror, I realized something I had never dared admit. I had confused sacrifice with love. I had let myself become the shadow so others could shine, believing it was devotion. But devotion had not saved me. It had erased me. The flowers caught the light, small but unyielding. Forget-me-not? For the first time in years, I whispered to my own reflection, voice shaking but true. I deserved to be protected too. The words startled me. They filled the small bathroom, echoed off porcelain and glass, sank into my skin like medicine. Tears rolled down my cheeks. But this time they weren't only despair. They were a strange, fierce release. Downstairs, a door slammed. Daniel's footsteps thundered through the hall. Emily's voice rose, sharp and urgent, while Jacob tried to soothe. I pressed the bracelet tighter against my skin, whispering again into the mirror as though making a vow. I deserved to be protected too. Then the footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. A knock, hard. "Sarah," Daniel's voice growled, low and dangerous. "Open up." The pounding on the bathroom door faded only when I turned the lock. Silence followed, but it was the kind of silence that felt staged, rehearsed, like a predator crouching out of sight. I waited, my ear pressed to the wood, until Daniel's footsteps retreated down the stairs. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. The next days blurred. Every corner of the house felt occupied, surveilled. If I lingered too long at the kitchen counter with my notebook, Emily would appear suddenly, asking what I was writing. If I stepped outside to water the plants, Mrs. Duffy from across the street would call out too brightly, "Everything all right, Sarah?" Her eyes lingered too long, curious, hungry. It wasn't long before I realized Daniel was laying the ground for something bigger. On Wednesday, I had an appointment at the pharmacy. The young pharmacist, Kevin, had always been polite, handing me my migraine medication with a smile and a, "Take care, Mrs. Bennet." But that day, he glanced at the screen, then back at me, hesitation flickering across his face. Mrs. Bennet," he said, lowering his voice. "There's a note on your file." "A note?" He swallowed. "It says your prescriptions should be reviewed by a family member before dispensing. I've never seen that before." Heat flooded my cheeks. "That's not legal," I whispered. "I agree," he said quickly. "That's why I filled it anyway. But you should know, someone is trying to make it stick." When I left the counter, a woman from church, Marjorie again, was at the end of the aisle pretending to study vitamins. Her eyes met mine, full of pity that felt poisonous. I clutched the bag to my chest and walked out, the bracelet pressing against my skin as if reminding me, "Don't disappear." 2 days later, the trap tightened further. Grace called me in the evening, her voice tight. "Sarah, did you know Dr. Collins, your family doctor, was contacted by Daniel?" My stomach dropped. "No. What did he say?" "That you've been confused, forgetting things, paranoid. He asked for your records. Collins refused without your consent, but, Sarah, he's trying to build a case." I sank into the couch, the notebook sliding from my lap. "He's using everyone. The pharmacist, the doctor, even Pastor Jim." Grace's voice softened. "That's why you have to keep writing. Dates, times, names. Don't just hold the truth. Preserve it." That night, I sat at the dining room table long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house creaked around me, the refrigerator humming like a tired witness. I flipped through the notebook, reading the words I had carved into paper. Bank, guardianship, police, paramedics, pharmacy, doctor. A chain of institutions, each link tightening around me. I traced the bracelet's engraved flowers with my finger, whispering, "Forget-me-not." It felt less like a plea and more like a command to the universe itself. The following Sunday, Daniel struck his next blow. I arrived at church alone, clutching my Bible like a shield. The sanctuary smelled of old wood and candle wax. People greeted me politely, but there was an undercurrent in their eyes. Curiosity, hesitation, pity. During the service, Pastor Jim's sermon was on trust, on the dangers of secrecy. Every word felt like it was aimed at me, though he never said my name. When the service ended, Marjorie touched my arm. "Sarah, dear," she said, voice syrupy. "I heard you've been under stress. Daniel mentioned you might step back from the women's group until things settle. We'll pray for you." Her words were soft, but they landed like stones. Daniel had already begun rewriting my place in the community. I left quickly, tears stinging my eyes, the bracelet burning against my wrist. Outside, the autumn air was sharp, almost metallic. The leaves crunched under my shoes as I whispered to myself, "I deserve to be protected too." But as I reached my car, I noticed 2 men from the congregation watching me from the steps, their conversation pausing mid-sentence. The lie was spreading, and soon, I feared, it would no longer matter what the truth was. The night after church, I couldn't sleep. The whispers, the stares, Marjorie's syrupy pity. It all clung to me like smoke. I sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, pen shaking in my hand. The bracelet pressed cold against my wrist, each flower like a nail pinning me to memory. At midnight, I called Grace. She didn't sound surprised to hear from me. "You can't fight shadows, Sarah," she said gently. "You need light, evidence, records, witnesses who remember you outside of Daniel's story." Her words steadied me. Where do I even begin? Start simple. Print bank statements. Keep pharmacy receipts. Write down names, exact phrases. Don't paraphrase. Don't trust your memory alone. And, Sarah? Yes? Don't let him isolate you. Bring someone into your corner who isn't afraid of him. I hesitated. The only people I had were Grace and Pastor Jim, whose silence at church had cut me like glass. But then I remembered someone else. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who had lived across the street for 20 years. She had watched me raise my kids, had borrowed sugar from me more times than I could count, had once cried in my kitchen when her husband left. She knew me before all this madness. I'll ask her, I whispered. Good, Grace said. Document. And don't let them convince you your truth is exaggeration. When I hung up, I pulled out a box of old photographs from the hall closet. My hands shook as I spread them across the table. Jacob in his Little League uniform, cheeks smeared with dirt. Emily at her first recital, dressed slightly crooked because I had sewn it myself at 2 a.m. Daniel and me, years younger, holding sparklers on the 4th of July, our faces open and unguarded. I thought about the sacrifices woven into those images, the job I gave up, the holidays I surrendered, the body I wore down with work no one acknowledged. For years I had told myself those sacrifices meant love, but now, looking at the faces in the photographs, I wondered, had love ever required so much erasure? I slipped a few of the pictures into my notebook, tucking them between pages of dates and quotes. Not as evidence for a court, though maybe one day they would serve that purpose, but as evidence for myself, proof that my life had not been a distortion, proof that I had been real. The next morning Grace came by. She carried a small portable scanner and set it up on my dining room table without asking permission, as if she knew I would hesitate if given the chance. Every document you have, she said firmly. We'll copy it. Keep one set here, one set with me. If anything happens, if they try to discredit you, you'll still have proof. Her practicality soothed me. We worked in silence, scanning bank statements, medical bills, even the note cards I had kept from my students years ago. Thank you scribbles in childish handwriting. Thank you, Mrs. Bennett, for helping me paint the sun. While the machine hummed, my mind drifted into fragments of memory. Jacob, age 7, crying after striking out, his small body crumpled in the dugout until I knelt beside him and whispered, "You are more than one mistake." Emily, age 4, clutching my neck after a nightmare, whispering, "Don't let the shadows get me, Mommy." Daniel, before ambition hardened his face, standing beside me in our first apartment with a broken faucet spraying water everywhere, both of us laughing until we cried as we tried to catch the water in bowls. My throat tightened. The laughter had been real once. The warmth had existed. But somewhere along the way, love had been replaced by control, and control by erasure. Grace touched my shoulder, pulling me back. Don't let nostalgia trick you into doubt. Those moments were real, but they don't excuse what's happening now. I nodded, tears blurring the photographs spread before me. She was right. Love wasn't supposed to turn into a weapon. By evening, I had a neat stack of copied documents, 2 flash drives, and a notebook thick with dates and details. It felt less like armor and more like a lifeline, but as I slid the final page into its plastic sleeve, I caught sight of a text on Grace's phone. She had left it on the table while packing up the scanner. The screen lit with a message preview from an unknown number. "Tell her the truth won't matter. We have witnesses. She'll be erased either way." My stomach dropped. "Grace, who sent that?" She snatched the phone quickly, her face hardening. "Don't worry about it." but the fear in her eyes told me everything. The walls of my home no longer felt safe. The notebook was no longer just my proof. It was my shield. And soon I would have to step into a room where my children, my husband, and their allies would twist every truth I had ever lived. The courthouse in downtown Chicago loomed gray against a November sky, its windows reflecting clouds like steel. I had never been inside before, and yet I knew this place would decide the shape of my life. Grace walked beside me carrying the folder of documents we had prepared. My bracelet pressed cold against my wrist, grounding me with every step. Inside, the air smelled of old wood polish and damp coats. A bailiff led us to a room not yet a courtroom, but something close. Polished tables, an American flag in the corner, a judge's chair elevated just enough to remind you of where power rested. Daniel was already there, sitting tall in his suit, flanked by Emily and Jacob. My daughter's eyes were sharp with certainty, my son's downcast with conflict. Behind them sat Pastor Jim, and further back, Marjorie from church. Her lips pursed as if she had been invited to witness my undoing. The judge, a woman with tired eyes and hair pulled into a severe bun, entered. Her gavel struck once. This hearing concerns the petition for temporary guardianship and property co-ownership involving Mrs. Sarah Bennett. The words landed like stones. My house, my autonomy, my name, all at stake in a sentence. Daniel's attorney, a man with slicked hair and a voice as smooth as oil, stood first. Your Honor, this is not about punishment. This is about protection. Mrs. Bennett's husband and children have grave concerns about her recent behavior. Erratic, suspicious, and paranoid. We ask the court for a temporary guardianship to ensure financial and medical stability. Emily leaned forward, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. Mom has been different. She goes through Dad's things. She makes accusations. She stays up all night writing strange notes. We're scared for her. I gripped the bracelet so hard the flowers pressed into my skin like thorns. Strange notes. That was my notebook, the lifeline Grace had told me to keep. They were trying to turn it into proof of madness. Jacob hesitated when it was his turn. His voice was softer. I love my mom, but she seems lost. She forgets things. She cries a lot. She doesn't trust us anymore. His eyes flicked to mine, glassy with unspoken apology. Daniel rose last. His tone was calm, almost sorrowful. I've tried to be patient, but Sarah has become unstable. She accuses me of secrecy when all I want is peace in my home. She's always been emotional. But lately it's worse. We're worried she might hurt herself. Or us. The lie twisted the air. Hurt them? My knees nearly buckled. Grace's hand found my arm, steadying me. The judge scribbled notes, expression unreadable. Mrs. Bennett, do you have a response? I opened my mouth, but Daniel's attorney cut in smoothly. Before she speaks, Your Honor, I'd like to submit testimony from community members. Pastor Jim stood, clearing his throat. I've counseled the Bennetts for years. Sarah has been under strain. I can't diagnose her, but I have seen volatility. I believe the family's concerns are genuine. Marjorie rose next, her pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights. I've seen her at the pharmacy, at the bank. She seems agitated, confused. It breaks my heart. My vision blurred. The trap had closed. Neighbors, pastor, even my own children, all rewriting me into a story of instability. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Bennett, you may respond. I stood, my knees trembling, the bracelet cool and steady on my wrist. My voice cracked but held. Yes, I've cried. Yes, I've written notes. Because my husband changed his phone password and told me it was none of my business anymore. Because my children, my own children, were told I am unstable. I am not sick. I am silenced. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, but she remained silent. Daniel's attorney smirked. You see, Your Honor, even here she escalates, emotional, defensive. The words pierced me deeper than I expected. Emotional, dramatic, paranoid. Labels used to erase me. Grace leaned closer, whispering, Hold on. The moment to speak isn't now. It's coming. But I wasn't sure how much more I could hold. The judge tapped her pen, expression unreadable. We will break for recess. Evidence for both sides will be presented after. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through the chamber, louder than thunder, shaking my bones. As the room emptied, Emily walked past me without looking up. Jacob lingered for a moment, his lips parting as if to say something. But then he followed his sister, shoulders hunched. Daniel was the last to leave. He leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. You'll lose. Everyone already believes me. I closed my eyes, the bracelet biting into my skin, and whispered to myself, Forget me not. When recess ended, I thought my legs would give out walking back into that room. Grace kept a hand on my elbow, steady as iron. The judge returned to her seat, her eyes heavy but alert. We will now hear evidence from Mrs. Bennet's side, she announced. Grace stood first. Her nurse's badge gleamed under the fluorescent light, and her voice was clear, clinical, undeniable, Your Honor. I've known Sarah Bennett for over 20 years. I've seen her under stress, yes, but I've also seen her lucid, responsible, compassionate. Last week, I personally evaluated her during a so-called wellness call. She was oriented, rational, and able to make decisions for herself. Any claim otherwise is an exaggeration, if not a fabrication. Daniel's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Grace held up a folder. Furthermore, here are records Sarah and I have collected. Bank statements showing unauthorized attempts to alter accounts without her consent. Notes from her pharmacist regarding suspicious instructions left by her husband, and a printed log of calls from the pastor and neighbors that show a pattern of manipulation rather than instability. The judge accepted the folder, flipping through the documents. The sound of paper was louder than anything Daniel had said all morning. Your Honor, Grace continued, Sarah has been documenting everything. These are her notes, in her own handwriting. Specific dates, times, words spoken. Not the scribblings of a paranoid woman, but the careful account of someone trying desperately to preserve the truth while her voice is being stripped away. Daniel's face tightened, but he stayed silent. Emily fidgeted. Jacob's eyes flickered between me and the judge, guilt written all over his expression. Grace glanced at me, then reached into her bag. And there is one more piece I want to show. She held up my bracelet. Silver, worn, engraved with tiny forget-me-not flowers. The courtroom lights caught on it, sending faint sparks across the room. This bracelet belonged to Sarah's mother, Grace said. She gave it to her daughter with the words, When people forget who you are, hold on to something that remembers you. Sarah has worn it every day of this ordeal, not as jewelry, but as an anchor. This is not the mark of someone who has lost herself. It is the mark of someone fighting to remain visible in a world trying to erase her. The room was silent. Even the judge looked up from her notes. Grace set the bracelet on the table in front of me, her hand covering mine for a brief moment before pulling away. Sarah deserves protection, yes, but not from herself, from the people who are trying to make her vanish. The judge's eyes narrowed at Daniel. "Do you wish to respond to these documents?" Daniel's attorney stood quickly, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, these so-called records are selective, emotional, and the bracelet, while touching, is not evidence. It's sentiment." Before the judge could answer, a voice rose from the back of the room, trembling yet determined. "I need to say something." Everyone turned. It was Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor. Her hands clutched her purse strap, her face pale but resolute. "I've lived across from the Bennetts for 20 years. I've watched Sarah raise her children, carry her family, give up everything for them. She's not unstable. She's invisible. And they've made her that way." Emily gasped. Daniel's face darkened. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes brimmed with tears. "I was silent too long. I heard the shouting. I saw her pacing the driveway at night, holding that notebook, like it was her last defense. She doesn't need guardianship. She needs people to stop crushing her." The judge raised a hand, quieting the murmurs. "Noted. Thank you, ma'am." My throat closed. Tears spilled freely, but this time not from despair. For the first time in weeks, someone outside my circle, or someone who had no reason to lie, had said aloud what I had been whispering into silence. I exist. I am not invisible. The judge's gaze swept the room, her pen tapping slowly against the folder of evidence. "We will recess once more," she said, "and then render a decision." The gavel struck. As people began to rise, Daniel leaned toward me, his voice venomous but low. "One bracelet and a neighbor won't save you." But when I looked down at the silver flowers gleaming against my wrist, I knew. It already had. The courtroom felt heavier after that recess, as though the walls themselves had absorbed every lie, every truth, every tremor of the last hours. I sat with my notebook in front of me, the bracelet firm around my wrist. Grace stayed at my side, her presence steady as a heartbeat. The judge returned, her expression grave. She set down the folder of evidence and lifted her gaze. The room hushed. "After reviewing the testimonies, documents, and statements," she began, her voice measured, "this court finds no grounds for a temporary guardianship over Mrs. Sarah Bennett." The words rang like bells, sharp and undeniable. My chest rose with a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Grace squeezed my hand. The judge continued, her tone harder now. "Furthermore, the attempts to alter financial accounts without Mrs. Bennett's knowledge raise serious concerns. Any such efforts will be considered fraudulent if pursued again. This court orders that all accounts remain as originally established." Daniel's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's jaw clenched. Emily's face flushed with disbelief, her lips parting as if to protest, but no words came. Jacob's eyes closed, relief softening his features. "And one more matter," the judge said, pausing for weight. "This court acknowledges the credible testimony of community witnesses who described a pattern of manipulation directed at Mrs. Bennett. The role of a spouse and children is to protect, not to diminish. Consider yourselves warned." The gavel struck once. The decision was final. My shoulders sagged, as though decades of weight had loosened. But alongside relief came a strange hollowness, a mourning that pressed tears to my eyes. I had won. But what had I lost? Emily turned toward me, fury burning in her eyes. "You think this changes anything?" she hissed. "You embarrassed us. You ruined our family's name." I tried to speak, but the words caught. She stormed out, her heels striking the tile like hammers. Daniel followed, his face unreadable, a storm barely contained. Jacob lingered. He hovered near the bench, torn between loyalties. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know it would go this far." I touched his hand lightly, not holding it, not pulling, just touching. "You're old enough to see the truth, Jacob. I can't make you choose it, but I hope you do." His eyes glistened, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving me with the echo of absence. The room emptied until only Grace and Mrs. Alvarez remained. Grace leaned close. "You won, Sarah." A sob broke free, sharp and bitter. "I won," I whispered. "But I lost my daughter. Maybe my son, too, and my husband. He was gone long before today." The bracelet glinted under the courtroom lights, the forget-me-not flowers catching every shard of illumination. A victory, yes, but also a gravestone for the family I had once believed unbreakable. As I left the courthouse, the autumn air struck my cheeks, brisk and unrelenting. People passed by, their lives moving forward, oblivious to the war that had just been fought in my name. I pressed the bracelet to my lips, whispering through tears. Forget me not. Not as a plea anymore, but as a vow. The weeks after the hearing passed like a season of thaw. Slowly the ice of fear receded, though rivers of grief still ran beneath the surface. I lived in the same house, walked the same halls, but everything felt altered, as if the air itself had changed. Daniel moved into his brother's home. Emily stopped speaking to me entirely, her silence a sharp blade that cut deeper than any word could have. Jacob called sometimes, awkwardly, as if afraid his voice alone might betray him. I learned not to wait for reconciliation, but to let space exist where once there had been suffocating loyalty. And in that space, something unexpected began to grow. I started painting again. The old easel I had stored in the attic came back into the light, its wood scarred but sturdy. The first stroke of color against canvas trembled, uneven, but it was mine. For the first time in decades, I painted not for approval, not for decoration, but for breath. I joined a women's group downtown, women who carried their own stories of being silenced, erased, reshaped to fit someone else's narrative. Some were divorced, some widowed, some still trapped but clawing toward freedom. We met in the basement of a church, drinking weak coffee and sharing truths we had never spoken aloud. One evening I brought my bracelet with me. I held it up, the engraved flowers catching the fluorescent light, and told them what my mother had said. When people forget who you are, hold on to something that remembers you. I told them how it had anchored me when I felt erased, how it had carried me into that courtroom, how it reminded me to whisper in the mirror. I deserved to be protected, too. The women cried. One of them, a retired teacher named Linda, reached across the table and touched my hand. "That bracelet isn't just memory anymore," she said softly. "It's freedom. It means you reclaimed yourself." I realized she was right. What once had been a relic of sacrifice was now a symbol of survival. I began to wear it less, not because it had lost its power, but because its lesson had already woven itself into me. Some days I left it on my dresser, resting atop my notebook, as if reminding me, you don't need to cling so tightly now. You remember yourself. I started small journeys, taking the train into the city to visit art exhibits, wandering through bookshops I hadn't stepped into since my 20s, sitting at cafes with nothing but a sketch pad and time. Each act felt radical, like reclaiming oxygen. One afternoon as I painted by the window, sunlight warm on my shoulders, I whispered words I never thought I'd own again. Strength isn't given, it's reclaimed. The canvas bloomed with color beneath my brush, not a masterpiece, but alive. And for the first time in years, so was I. But even in this fragile renewal, the silence of my daughter echoed in the background. A silence I knew might never break. It has been months since that day in court. Yet sometimes I still wake in the night, expecting to hear Daniel's footsteps in the hallway or Emily's voice sharp with accusation. The absence of their presence is its own kind of haunting. And yet, I am learning that absence does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes it means space. Space to breathe, to create, to remember who I am when I am not shrinking to fit someone else's story. I still walk through this house, my hands brushing the walls I once thought they could take from me. Every photograph, every worn step on the staircase, every sunlit corner belongs to me as much as it does to anyone. The weight of memory hasn't vanished, but I carry it differently now. Less as a burden, more as proof of survival. Emily has not returned. Jacob visits occasionally, awkward but tender, his eyes searching for something he cannot yet name. Perhaps one day he will see me clearly, perhaps not. The ache of that uncertainty is sharp, but it no longer defines me. The bracelet lies on my dresser most days, resting beside my notebook. When I pick it up, I no longer wear it as armor. I hold it as remembrance of my mother's voice, of the woman I used to be, of the moment I stood in a mirror and whispered, I deserve to be protected too. Love, I have learned, does not mean erasure. And forgiveness. Forgiveness is not always a door back into a relationship. Sometimes it is simply releasing the hold someone's cruelty had on your life. If there is one truth I carry now, it is this. Limits don't kill love. They reveal it. I don't know if my daughter will ever forgive me for refusing to vanish quietly. I don't know if my son will ever stop standing in the middle ground. But I know who I am now, and that is enough. So I leave this story with you. The strangers who are listening, the ones who might recognize pieces of themselves in my silence, my sacrifice, my survival. What would you have done in my place? Tell me. Share your truth. Let your voice be heard, because silence is where erasure begins. And I, for one, refuse to be forgotten.